All right, good evening, everyone. Everybody hear me just fine? Fantastic. Good evening, everyone. I'm Guillermo Gomez, Director of Programs at Urban Design Forum. Thanks, everyone, for coming out tonight. I just want to give a big welcome to our friends joining us from Columbus and LA. You picked a really great week to be in New York. The city is literally on fire. Record heat outside between the game last night, the Knicks game, and then the World Cup. The energy of the city is really through the roof, so welcome. At Urban Design Forum, our mission is to connect and inspire New Yorkers to design, build, and care for a better city. We convene over 1,200 members from diverse backgrounds to learn together, debate, and shape a vibrant city for all. So tonight's event is the second event in a three-part series we've developed in partnership with the Central Park Conservancy, exploring how commemoration takes shape in New York City's parks and public spaces, from early ideas through public review and long-term stewardship. This series is part of the Seneca Village Toward a Permanent Commemoration, which is the Conservancy's ongoing initiative funded by the Mellon Foundation that my colleague Jessica in just a moment will tell you a little bit more about. Now, let's just kind of get a quick sense in the room. Who here is an Urban Design Forum member? Can you raise your hand? What about a Central Park Conservancy member? Anybody folks in the room? There's a couple. Okay, fantastic. So before we get started, in the true tradition of the forum, I want to invite you to just quickly turn to your neighbor, introduce yourself, and on the theme of tonight, maybe share one commemorative landscape that has truly moved you. It could be in New York City, it could be anywhere around the world. So maybe just take 1 minute, let's get warmed up, and then, well, I'm sure you're already warmed up enough, but let's get the room warmed up a little bit, and then we'll get started. Okay, we'll give it another 10 seconds and then we'll get started. Okay, let's welcome folks back to the front of the room. If you could hear me, wave at the stage. Okay, fantastic. Okay. So let's get our program started. We have so much to learn from other cities, and that's exactly why we're here tonight. New Yorkers are just as eager to learn from our counterparts across the country as we are to understand what's happening in our own backyard. So just a few quick ground rules before we get started. I want to invite you to be present tonight. Put your phone away if you're able to and really connect with these inspiring stories tonight. That said, if you need to get up, stretch your legs, use the restroom, take a call outside, please do so. So with that, I'm going to welcome Jessica McLean from the Conservancy to kick off tonight's conversation. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Hello. My name is Jessica McLean, and I am the Director of Public History at the Central Park Conservancy, the organization responsible for the day-to-day care of Central Park. And it's a pleasure to be with you here this evening, and it's nice to see some familiar faces in the crowd this evening from other events that we have done. And I want to thank you, Guillermo, for that wonderful introduction and for bringing good energy and setting the stage for the conversation that we're going to have here this evening. And as Guillermo mentioned, this evening's program is the second in a collaborative series that the Central Park Conservancy has undertaken with the Urban Design Forum. I'm going to now, we've heard from Guillermo. I'm Jessica. And we are here tonight as part of our effort to permanently commemorate Seneca Village in Central Park. With the generous support of the Mellon Foundation's Monument Project, and this is an initiative aimed at transforming the nation's commemorative landscape to ensure our collective histories are more completely and accurately represented. We are hosting 2 years of public programs to deepen awareness of Seneca Village, to encourage new ways of thinking about commemoration, and to deepen awareness of, and to discuss how race, history, and public space intersect. A project that we started, we launched on the 200th year of Seneca Village's founding. Oops, sorry, apologize. So this initiative will culminate in a community-informed framework that will guide a future design for the permanent commemoration of Seneca Village in Central Park. Before Central Park was built, the area from approximately West 82nd Street to 89th Street on the west side of the park was home to a predominantly Black community that has come to be known as Seneca Village, established in 1825. By 1855, Seneca Village was home to approximately 225 people, with 3 churches, a school, and high rates of Black property ownership. When the city acquired the land for the park in 1857, its residents were displaced and the community forgotten. The long-term goal for a commemorative element for Seneca Village is a design that celebrates its history, inspires reflection, and publicly situates it as a site of significance in American history. And central to this effort is community engagement, and that's what brings us here this evening, to share 3 examples of projects from across the country that first center community engagement as an essential component of the commemorative process. And second, they're all projects that engage with public space and memory, urban history, and civic engagement. The program this evening will include brief presentations from each of our 3 projects, followed by a panel discussion, which will allow you to hear more from these projects in conversation with one another. And we'll conclude with a question and answer period with you, the audience, and we'll open it up for questions with you all. So to introduce this evening's presenters, we have 3 projects. We have the Gate of the Exonerated team, which is based are my colleagues at the Central Park Conservancy. This particular project is located in Central Park, and you will hear from John Reddick and Lane Adonisio. Our second project, Reimagining Columbus, brings our friends, and I'm going to call you all friends now, we spent the morning together in the park, Amanda Golden and Kimberly Danielle from Columbus, Ohio. And then we will hear from Adriana Garcia-So and Cindy Donis, who will share their work that they have done with the Sleepy Lagoon Memorial in South Los Angeles, yeah? Would you say south? Southeast Los Angeles. All right. And I would like to start by inviting John and Lane to the podium to share a little bit about their project in the Gate of the Exonerated.
Thank you, Jessica. Hi, everybody. John and I are here to talk about the Gate of the Exonerated, which is a commemorative project in the north end of Central Park. I'm going to start with some background. The context for the project, which came up in the course of discussion about a capital project of the Conservancy to replace a recreation facility and restore the park. And it was the Lasker Pool and Rink that was built in the 1960s on a portion of the Harlem Mere. This is a view of the facility. It was a swimming pool in the summer, a skating rink in the winter. For almost half the year, it was empty and unused and was really just basically a large concrete barrier that cut off the Harlem Mere and the community from the rest of the park. This is a view of that same spot, an historic view around 1900, and it really illustrates what the park was meant to provide to the citizens of the city. This is how the designers of the park described the purpose of the park, that basically it was to provide healthful recreation for all of the people of the city. And when they use the word recreation, we tend to think of recreation nowadays more often associated with, say, sports and athletics and what we would call active recreation. But they had a very specific meaning when they spoke about recreation. And this is how they described it. It was about a spacious and tranquil landscape, really the opposite of the city. And so the idea was that healthful recreation, as they described it, was recreation in nature. And actually the word recreation in connection with parks actually dates back to the creation of Central Park. And when they used the word recreation, they were talking about the power of the landscape to uplift and what they said recreate a sense of well-being that life in the city tended to diminish. And this was the primary purpose of the park. That purpose has always been under threat as people have looked at the open space as a place to put things. So this is a 1918 illustration from the New York Times that shows what the park would have become if all of the recreation facilities, cultural attractions, monuments and memorials, other buildings and objects had made it into the park. It would have destroyed what the park was created to be, which was this idea of recreation in nature. So here we see in the 1880s, two boys at the lake in Central Park. In the 1930s, two boys up near the Harlem Mere in the park. Here's a view of the spot where those boys were, where a stream course entered the Harlem Mere. And this is the spot where that facility, the pool and rink, was built in the 1960s. And this is just an overlay. We kind of overlaid the footprint of the pool and rink on top of an 1873 historic map, and it shows how it just was really kind of squeezed into the space. The model kind of shows how it's kind of crammed into the space, disrupted the flow of water, disrupted circulation, disrupted the visual connection between the landscapes. And that spot where we had seen the two boys playing, what was a scenic spot became facility, concrete, fences, asphalt. So over the last several years, the Conservancy has completed a restoration project to still provide the facility, but to do it in the context of a restored park. And so just very, very briefly to give you a sense of that project, this is the facility right before demolition. And the new facility, the design integrates the facility into the topography of the park, wraps the landscape around it, and creates a space that can be used year-round. It's a year-round space. So instead of just a skating rink and a pool, the space is usable year-round. And the integration into the landscape means that that the experience of the users in the surrounding park is preserved and is not disrupted by the facility. It also recreated that stream course connection that had been, and pedestrian path connection that had been disrupted by the previous facility. So there's a view of that stream course, and it was in the context of the discussions with the community, the Harlem community, leading up to this project, the impact of something that had happened 30 years earlier to 5 young boys in the community came up as something that needed to be acknowledged.
And as Elaine was mentioning, we took this project to the community, and they approved the project, and they felt we were making a great design effort there to advance restored area and a new pool facility. But one of the other things that came up for the community was also a troubled history related to that area of the park. In 1989, there was an incident in the park where 5 African-American boys from Harlem, Hispanic and African-American young men from Harlem, were falsely accused for the attack and rape of a jogger in Central Park. The news coverage of that was sensationalized to a great extent, and the young people felt really tainted by that storyline, and they were really looking to, in our effort to really talk about and look forward to a more engaged conversation around the park. When we had this conversation, the rink and pool was still under the concession of the Trump organization, and the community felt the facility started to represent to them a carryover of that earlier period. And they looked to us to somehow to heal that history. Part of that, from that discussion, one of the members had put forward, from the community board, had put forward the idea that whatever we did in terms of commemoration really should speak to that history and the injustices faced by the community in terms of feeling disowned of the park. To the community board's credit, they organized, they developed a task force. They really put together an overview of not only just the commemoration effort, but also to look at the issues of unjust incarceration and face the other issues that we're facing post-George Floyd and the things that were going on in the city. In-park commemoration, they hoped in this report to focus on in-park commemoration that would encapsulate a return to the site and the origins of the miscarriage of justice. And in a sense, full circle, offer an iconic healing of systematic wounds for the broader societal level. And looking at that too, they thought that we should work to focus on addressing those issues in a broader way. One of the things that came up constantly in the conversation was a sense of healing in looking at that past history. And looking at the park, we could see, as Lane mentioned earlier, this sense of enlarged freedom is to all, at times, the most certain and the most valuable gratification afforded by the park. In that sense of open space, it's almost counter to the feeling of being incarcerated. And in a sense, this incident had robbed the community of this sense of ownership of the park. Young people felt stigmatized. Their parents encouraged them not to enter into the park. And even the young people who came felt patrolled and unwelcome. And they looked to this effort to really advance that, this sense of healing and a sense of engaging the park in a way to address that.
So what we heard through this discussion with the community stakeholders also brought to mind one of the ways that the park's founders had expressed the idea that the park was built for and belonged to the people of the city, which was the naming of the park's entrances. The names of the 20 original entrances were meant to represent all of the people of the city. I'm sorry, can I take that? The names are meant to represent all of the people of the city, and so the gate names refer to occupations, refer to boys, women, girls, and there's also a gate of all saints, which is community and civic leaders, basically the do-gooders of the city. This is sort of a powerful communication of the idea that the park and this sense of enlarged freedom it offered were meant to be for everyone. And this became the inspiration for our discussions with the community board and stakeholders about a meaningful way for the park to acknowledge the exonerated five and the broader community of wrongfully incarcerated people that they represent.
From this exercise, we really thought this was something we might take back to the community members in terms of looking at one of the gates along the perimeter of the park. The original gates were named in 1862, but since then there have been several additional entrances added to the park. This location is on 110th Street, just west of 5th Avenue and between Lenox Avenue, and along a corridor that's now come to be known as the Harlem Gateway, which also honors other prominent African Americans, including Frederick Douglass, Duke Ellington, and Malcolm X. Looking at this site and feeling it was appropriate for this effort, we went back to the community with the idea, and they were very supportive. Also, we had to reach out to the Parks Commissioner at the time and to see if this was something we could even advance to the community, and there was support from the Parks Department to look at a naming of a gate. In this effort as well, there were three members of the Conservancy and ourselves who worked toward bringing this together. And if you look at the conversations talked about in this article, they're really focusing on how we brought all the parties into engaged activity in the park and in this design. Here we are. This is on the 20th anniversary of the exoneration of the young men. These are three of the five of the exonerated five. One of the gentlemen mentioned that he had not been to this site since the incident years before, and he felt the first time there was this open gesture of healing between the community and the park. Here's another picture. Besides the exonerated five feeling that this was a commitment of instill into the park fabric, something that acknowledged a wrongful activity, and a sense that they too were representing all the people that needed to be exonerated, not just their one incident, but something that really touched the fuller audience. And also the community felt, because they had lobbied for this and really pushed to advance this project, that they too felt a full partnership in the effort. Also, besides actually doing the engraving within the wall and the historic fabric of the park, we also supported it with other signage. Just near the entrance of the gate, there's an informative piece of signage that gives you the history of the incident and the evolving effort to do the commemoration, as well as on our website and in other information about the park and its commemoration. This is also continued to be addressed and updated.
And so we'll just to close on a few, in the next slide, to close on a few just reflections on commemoration in Central Park. Monuments and commemoration were not part of the original vision of the park for two reasons. One is that it was meant to be a place for recreation and nature, and you don't find monuments in nature, except for natural monuments. And two, the idea that a park dedicated to all people shouldn't include monuments to individuals. That said, monuments made their way in because of this tendency we talked about for the park to be seen as a place to put things. Most are of people or events that have no direct connection to the park and are objects in a space that was supposed to be about access for all to nature. We know that the reality is that not all communities have historically been made to feel that the park was for them, and that a particularly significant historic community was sacrificed to create this cherished space. So as we contemplate how to honor these communities and their connection to the park, we're thinking about the promise of the landscape and its power to heal, and how much more meaningful commemoration can be when place is a participant and not just a platform. So with that, I just want to end on a few words from Yusef Salam, who is one of the exonerated five, who was elected in 2023 to City Council representing Central Harlem. And this is him speaking at the dedication of the new facility, the Davis Center at the Harlem Mir.
When a city listens to its people, when planners and policymakers understand that true equity means building beauty where there was once neglect, and opening gates where there were once barriers, that means everything.
Thank you.
Thank you, John and Lane. I'd like to please welcome to the stage Amanda Golden and Kimberly Danielle.
Thank you, Jessica. We are really excited to be here. Our project is a bit different than the last one that you've just heard from. My name is Amanda Golden. I'm the co-founder and managing principal of Designing Local. We're a cultural planning firm located in Columbus, Ohio, and we are the project managers for the Reimagining Columbus project.
I'm Kimberly Danielle, and you can see all of the things right on the screen. I do the community engagement with Designing Local.
So our project was also a Mellon-funded project. In 1955, the city of Columbus was gifted a Christopher Columbus statue by a group of Italian community members. In 1955, our country was just recovering from World War II, and as was Italy. And so this was sent as a major gesture. This was our cementation of our first sister city relationship with the city of Genoa and the city of Columbus. Over 100,000 people showed up to this erection of this statue. It was a really big deal in our city. Italians and Irish immigrants had settled in Columbus long before this time, and for them, this being the only piece of public art on our City Hall campus was a big deal, as you can imagine. It meant notoriety, it meant being seen in public, and it meant a great deal to be at the gate of our City Hall. In 2020, just like everywhere else in this country, monuments were coming down. So in June of 2020, the Christopher Columbus Monument did come down as well. And so our community really wanted to have a conversation about what to do with this monument. Our city has no public art policy, so there was no directive or process on what to do when you're removing a monument from public space. So the Mellon Project funded a community conversation where our community had conversations about what Christopher Columbus means in our community, how he means something different today than he did in 1955, and what that means for our City Hall. Again, this statue was the only piece of public art on our City Hall campus. And so when it came down, there's no pieces of public art on the City Hall campus, just a blade sign that says City of Columbus, City Hall. So this was a big deal. So we had two outcomes that the grant kind of directed. The first outcome was that we would think about what goes back in its space. Our mayor, Mayor Ginther, determined, along with a large panel, that the Christopher Columbus statue would not go back on City Hall's campus, but they did not define what would happen to it other than those parameters. And so we came up with a public art plan for City Hall's campus, which we'll talk about in a little bit, as well as thought about how to recontextualize the statue itself. And all of those conversations were informed by deep community conversations that Kimberly led with a number of other team members. When we started this process, it was really important for our team to build the right team. We knew that in order to have conversations not only about Christopher Columbus, but about commemoration in public spaces, that it couldn't be a bunch of what in Columbus are a bunch of white planners and architects. It had to be a multifaceted team who were all representing different backgrounds. So we have planners, landscape architects, historians. Many of them are of Italian descent, which is really important in this conversation. We had Kimberly, who was leading our public engagement facilitation, as well as Shelley Corbin, who is a member of the Lakota Nation. The state of Ohio has no federally recognized tribes, and so it was important for us to acknowledge the presence of Indigenous members of our community, even if they weren't part of what Ohio was at that time. Our city has also gone through a recent UNESCO World Heritage designation, and so that was also a major part of this conversation, given the proximity to the UNESCO World Heritage designation and the Hopewell ceremonial sites. When we began this conversation, we knew we needed to ask big questions, and so Kim is going to talk about how we did that and the ways that we did that.
I think one of the things that maybe to kind of set the tone is from the onset of finding out that there would be community engagement about this, people were already angry. So imagine you're going to start the conversation and they come to the first conversation angry. And we're knowing we have 2 years to hold space with a collective groups of audiences. So what we ended up doing was designing a process that went basically large to small and then back out to large again. And we realized soon after starting it that it would necessitate affinity-based conversations because the context for how people were belonging to the story wildly changed depending on who was in the room. And in order for those conversations, we don't believe any conversation is purely safe. I don't believe in a safe space when you don't know people's stories. So in order for the spaces to be safer, braver, and more courageous, we knew that we had to give affinity-based spaces for people to be separated out so they didn't feel like they were in defense inside of conversations. One of the things that was so fascinating is across the different portions of conversations, there were about 8 values that showed up no matter which affinity-based group we talked to. But what's interesting about this is they didn't define these 8 values the same way. Right? So the context was very different, and that was a conversation we had to have over and over again with the city to say, when we're talking about fear, the Black community does not view fear the same way that the Italian community does. And they don't view fear the same way, same, all of the values, very, very different context matters. This gives you a little bit of an idea of the different kinds of formats we use. We did compression planning. We did a lot of art of hosting rural cafes. We did storyboarding sessions. We did fish bowls. We did all different kinds of things, and tried to get people different ways. Oh, and this is an example of the fish bowl where we brought folks from all different affinity-based conversations into have conversations with each other so we can just model. We're trying to do this the right way. What does it look like to have difficult conversations the right way? Right? It's possible to do that. And I want to also highlight, Shelley did such an amazing job of bringing people into indigenous spaces and understanding framework, understanding and being careful in how we do things, careful about how we think about water, how we think about animals, how we think about trees and nature, so that we had a respect level that was part of each of the elements that we did. Mm-hmm. More pictures. We have the most amazing pictures. Yeah. We do.
One of the things that was really important in our conversations that we heard from every group is that Christopher Columbus, to many and most, I'll say, represented a severance of our connection to our earth. And so when we began to think about the outcomes of this project, we knew that nature had to play a major role in both the outcome of the City Hall Public Art Plan as well as the recontextualization. So when we began to think about what goes back on City Hall's campus, we knew that our community had to identify what values needed to exist so that the collection could reflect the value of the people whose house or hall that was. Our City Hall in 2020 and for many decades before has acted as a gathering space before protest. And so that's where people will meet up. The State House is literally a block away. They'll meet up there, they'll gather, they'll organize, and then they'll march around the city. And so we needed to honor that commitment to that space. And
really
so
quickly, Amanda, I wanted to make sure we said this. It is important to note that the statue came down around a protest that was happening in Columbus with the Black community. So that also is part of why there was a lot of tension.
Yes. And our City Hall has 4 different facades. And so in order to think about how public art could fold into those historic facades, it was important to understand their purpose. And so when we began to think about the different purposes of each side, we began to develop a collection recommendation for the city to follow. So we have a more formal space where we have only mayor and council accessing it, needed to remain utilitarian. And so a lot of the artwork that we're recommending in these places are not meant to disrupt that very specific role of that facade. We also have a front facade, right? And that front facade is what is seen in every single newscast. And so we needed that to be something that could show people what our city is really about. In our plan that we hope you'll read more of, we're actually recommending that one of the statements from Mayor Sensenbrenner, who was welcoming the artist to Alfieri to Columbus, is actually etched in that stone. It's this beautiful quote about seeking justice for all. And then we have some other things that are more temporary in nature. We also uncovered during this process that permanence is not best. I think we can all agree with that statement. And so it was really important that there was a mixture of recommendations from both temporary and permanent interventions. And finally, I think this is the more exciting part of this presentation, is that our community really developed a generational vision together. Our design team for over a year sat in conversation with Kim, myself, and Shelley, and really bounced ideas off of the people who actually heard all of the conversations in community and held all those stories. And as a result, we developed a site that was close to the river. It was accessible with multi-modes, right? And it provided an opportunity for people to get into nature and experience the river that has been so important to so many generations before us and will be so important to so many generations after us. So we developed a series of 7 different moments. I'm not going to go through all the moments. I'm just going to show you our most favorite ones. You can kind of see the space. When you arrive in this space, it's a womb-like shape that was intentional. We realized that sometimes the last time people felt safe was in their mother's womb. And so this experience is all about coming out of the womb and experiencing this wonderful space. You'll come out, you'll get to look out at the river, and then you'll get to begin to reflect. So you can kind of see here on the bottom right, you can see Christopher if you would like. In all aspects of this place, we are making sure that people have the opportunity to see him if they would like, but he is recontextualized in our city's history. He is a tiny moment in Central Ohio's history. And we wanted to talk substantially about how within that timeline he could be situated in order to communicate different things. So you can kind of see 4 different treatments of how the statue would be represented. Our team's desired outcome is the one here on the bottom right, primarily because it brings him into a more public walking space and allows him to be seen from all aspects. From a maintenance perspective, that's also the favored choice, as you can imagine. One of our most favorite places is this reflective space as well. So you're gonna come up after you've seen Christopher and experienced kind of the entire timeline, which includes the removal of the statue and all of the protests that led to this point. And you're able to come up here and sit and reflect under a beautiful piece of stained glass artwork and look out at the river to understand kind of what Columbus was before it was Central Ohio and before it was Columbus. And then finally, again, the generations of people that care about Christopher Columbus now will not be alive to see this happen. But who will be alive are the children who are growing up in Columbus today. And so they played a major role in defining what this space looked like and ensuring that play and access to nature and access to our waterways and our river and the rocks that are part of the river played a major role in how they access the site. So there is a huge nature-based play opportunity here. And I will end there. We hope that you'll visit our website. Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Now, please come to the stage. Join me in welcoming Adriana Garcia-So and Cindy Donas, who are going to speak about their work with the Sleepy Lagoon Memorial in Los Angeles, California.
Thanks. Thanks so much for inviting us here. We're just as excited to be here with you all. So my name is Adriana Garcia-So. I'm a project manager with the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust. And just to share a little bit about our organization, our mission is deeply rooted in the health and wellness of the communities that we serve. And we do so by addressing park equity through the construction of parks and gardens, stewardship and caring of the parks that we create, and policy and advocacy to sustain the work that we do. And then just to tie it before I pass it to Cindy, it's important to note that land use disparities in LA County are shaped by historically racist planning and policy practices that continue to affect the communities today, which is what makes our work so relevant and our partnership with ECR so important.
Hi, everybody. My name is Cindy. My pronouns are she, her. I am a youth organizing director and water organizer with East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice. We formally formed as an organization in 2001. The goal of building capacity, space, strength for communities to be self-advocates in their own neighborhoods and communities, and to really address environmental racism and help shape communities where we all can live and breathe with dignity. And so for some context before going into the specific project, there is a lot of environmental harms that happen across the county of LA, and specifically in the city of Maywood, where this project is taking place. Maywood is a heavily populated community and neighborhood, a lot of immigrants, diaspora from Mexico and Central America. It's heavily industrialized and has a large pollution burden, with a lot of community members having asthma, cardiovascular illnesses, mental health issues as well, and high levels of cancer. And so these are some of the issues that Maywood and the residing neighborhoods face. I'll name one. Specifically was Exide, a car battery recycling facility that we were able to shut down in 2015. But what left behind was a lot of contamination. Over 7 million tons of lead for over 30 years during its existence. And we are actively engaging in the cleanup process of both where the facility was at in the city of Vernon, and all of the residential impacts in soil, which includes the city of Maywood. The park that this project is taking place in is also no stranger to environmental harms. This is the visuals for Pemmico, but it had 3 different facilities in its existence before becoming a park between the 1940 and 1991. Pemmico left a lot of storage drums with different chemicals. When it shut down, then there was a fire, and all of that contaminated the soil and the groundwater. And so it's in the red. And the parameter here is the parameter of the park. The next slide shows W.W. Henry, which was a floor and roof adhesive facility, who also left their trash, they left their waste underground, 3 storage tanks. Thankfully, that one is has been cleaned up, and the monitoring process that currently exists will be taken out. And then the third arrow position was one of the only friendlier facilities. They are repackaging household appliances, and that's pretty safe. Therefore, you see the red, yellow, and green. And so that's context for the park. It was a super fun site, went through cleaning processes, and opened formally in 2008 as a park. And so how do we get to the memorial? For East Yard, our founder for the organization, his name is Angelo Logan, who has ties to the Sleepy Lagoon, the Zoot Suit riots, and the Pachuco culture within his family. And in conversation with other community members, including the artists Sandra de la Rosa and Arturo Romo, who make up Mapache City Projects, there was a dream there of convening folks to memorialize through conversation and figure out, what does that mean? What is a memorial for the Sleepy Lagoon? The lagoon does not exist anymore. Where it used to be is now considered the city of Bell. And when we started this project, we were outlining like what the important pieces here. And one of them is to acknowledge and give space for Tongva people, both memorializing pre-colonization and their current existence and resistance. As East Yard, it's a big value to collaborate, to be co-conspirators, allies with the Tongva tribe and Tongva relatives. The other is to memorialize the Sleepy Lagoon body of water, and rebuild that connection with water as community members. There is a river, the Paime Pahait, which means West River in Tongva, right next to the park. The park has access to the river. The other point being the Pachuco youth culture and rebellion, just a really critical piece in history, but also something we see every time. Youth are the present, are the now, are part of the movement. And the not so great piece of it, which is the murder that happened at the Sleepy Lagoon that led to a hunting of Mexican-American youth across East LA and Los Angeles. That also led to the Zoot Suit riots and the different trials. And so this project was intended to create a memory, a collective memory, a collective honoring of our cultures and communities and resistance. We did not have a specific place in mind, but we scoped around, and that was part of the goals of where will this land? Where will this be? And through that engagement, also learned what are key important elements that community members want to see in this project. And so there was a lot of folks that contributed to this. I'll name the late Julia Bagoni, who's a Tongva elder and cultural bearer who passed down a lot of knowledge through this project. I'll name my team member, Whitney, who led this specific piece of the project itself. There were different researchers also, Floribos Lopez and Gabriel Gutierrez, that helped leading up to the renderings that we have some slides on that the 2 artists I named earlier created. So this is a whispering wall and bench. These are meditative seating areas that honored significantly important trees in different cultures, as well as languages like Tongva, English, Spanish, Maya, and Nahuatl. And then the bridge crossing walking path that really is an homage to just the dance and culture and subversion of like race, class, gender, and sexuality within the Pachuco movement. And so we were looking at this at a very small part of the project, specifically where it's red. And so after we're like, wait, we can't do all of these things where it's red on that project. We were also hit with COVID, and we had to transition a bit and wait. And that gave us a lot of time to ponder and then also connect. So I'll pass it to Adriana to share more about that.
So the visioning process that East Yard led happened in 2019. And in 2022, there was a site identification and redevelopment process that was able to happen through the Link Advocates, Governments, and Families project. And the goal for this project was really for municipal agencies, community-based organizations, and technical assistance providers like the Land Trust to form a team and be able to lead a community-driven planning process to identify sites for either acquisition or redevelopment. And through a series of over 20 workshops that Communities for Environment, who's also EJ.org, supported with through their extensive membership base to lead outreach and engagement, we were able to select this site, Riverfront Park, in the city of Maywood for that renovation process. Because this park, just like for a bit of context, it's along the LA River. Let's see if I can use this. LA River, there's a lot of industrial land use and then residential land use here. That's why this park is so important. It gets a lot of love. It's kind of seen as a regional park, and this redevelopment process was going to enhance the park. But then when Cindy actually and her friend Delia Ortega, who's an organizer at CBE, they're both like friends from the community, and through word of mouth, they told each other about this process, which is why we were able to convene. And incorporate the Sleepy Lagoon Memorial into our park renovation process. So now in 2024, we've pretty much been able to coalesce all of the partners that were part of that 2019 visioning process and bring them along the entire design process that the Land Trust is able to help manage. So our role is as technical assistants, we manage the construction, the design through construction, and we also help build capacity with the city by fundraising to build, this elaborate park that otherwise, if the city were to take this on with their budget, it wouldn't be as beautiful and as packed with site amenities. So our partners that were brought on were Sacred Places Institute for Indigenous People, and they really helped ground truth a lot of the Tongva culture and historical narratives that came from that Sleepy Lagoon visioning process. East Yard and CBE are the two EJ orgs that continue to help lead the outreach and engagement. We've been able to also collaborate with a new member, Eduardo Robles from California for the Arts, who introduced us to the Mellon Foundation. And us, the city of Maywood, the original artists that produced the concept note, Mapache City Projects, are part of this implementation project. Then in 2024, we were generously awarded another grant through the Mellon Foundation that was able to fund additional engagement to reintroduce this Sleepy Lagoon Memorial project back to the community and be able to explore design ideas that could develop the Sleepy Lagoon Memorial project itself, but then also begin to inform the rest of the park design. We hired Tawa, who are indigenous-led architects based in Arizona, to be able to translate all of these Tongva cultural historical narratives into a design framework. And 3 critical components of that framework included ways of knowing, identity, and lifeways. And we also partnered with Salt Landscape Architects. We hired them because of their experience with park design, they were able to build a lot of these design frameworks that Tawa and SPI had created. And these are a few story maps of the explorations that Salt was that created to organize things like space layout, materiality. What else do I have? Nature-based design solutions, and more. So here's another story map. And our community partners were part of the entire design process. And so here's a rendering of our park, of Riverfront Park, that includes the Sleepy Lagoon Memorial. It's a 5-acre park. It's packed with passive and recreation, active recreation amenities, as well as nature-based design solution, accessible ADA pathways. And here is a rendering of the Sleepy Lagoon Memorial components that Mapache City Projects is working with our landscape architects to be able to develop these elements to be buildable and incorporated into the final project. And all to say that, so the Sleepy Lagoon, the memorial is intended to not be this like commemorative space with a sculpture that commemorates just one person, but more of like a living memorial. This is, if our artists were here, they would just go on this beautiful like story on how they came up with the design and what it means. But essentially, the living memorial is meant to act as a space that the community was able to reclaim and continue to program and tell these stories of the Sleepy Lagoon Memorial and share themes of racial justice, share themes of local history, and even teach land and water rights. And just to share a quick timeline of where we are with the project, we are aiming to go into construction this year. And we're also working with all of our partners in the Mellon Foundation to go through an extensive strategic planning process to plan stewardship and care. And we look forward to what that's going to look like. Thank you so much.
And now we are going to move on to our panel discussion. Thank you all for providing that important and valuable context. So I would like to invite back up to the stage Amanda and John and Cindy, who will join. So we'll have a chance to talk through lessons learned, community engagement strategies. And I'd also like to introduce Isabel Castilla, who is an associate partner at Field Operations, where she leads the design and delivery of large-scale public realm projects. And she's also a commissioner on the New York City Public Design Commission. So thank you, Isabel, for joining us. And I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining, and thank you and your teams for these wonderful presentations. I think one thing that it really struck me is that in hearing you present, you can really feel the passion that you have for these projects, and how they have been a labor of love in all the time that you have spent, and how you're ultimately really doing these projects not for yourself, but for the community and for the city at large. And that really comes through. So I would like to start the conversation by speaking about the role of community, which is something that all three projects are really grounded upon. And you know, many of us are designers. We all do public spaces. We all deal with communities many times. Very rewarding process, but also sometimes very challenging. And one of the things that I think makes community engagement challenging is that when you first announce an engagement process, oftentimes the people are very well organized, the people are very outspoken, the people that may be angry are those that show up. Those are the ones that have the strongest voices. But when we're dealing with projects like these, where there are issues with memory, with identity, sometimes with historical injustice, we want to ensure also that some of those other voices also have a room on the table, that they are really important. But sometimes the voices are less likely to come forward, either because they're not as easy to reach, or because they're sometimes intimidated by some of the other angry community members. So I would like to ask each of you to further elaborate on your community engagement process, and specifically, how did you ensure you found and gave forum to those quieter, harder to reach, more historically excluded voices to ensure you had an even layer of information and input in each one of your projects? So if you don't mind starting with that.
Sure. And Kim was really the brains behind developing our process. But in Columbus, as you can imagine, the Italian Americans were the most vocal as part of this process, and rightfully so. They felt like the thing that had commemorated their community and their existence was being removed from public space, and it was. And so the way that they went about that was a bit challenging, because it did kind of force other people out of the conversation and immediately turned people off. So the way that Kim designed our engagement strategy was to ensure that we never gave anybody a microphone to stand in front of the room and talk at us or talk about the statue itself. Instead, she developed these really wonderfully rich questions about cultural significance and how our cultures show up in the built environment. Whether that's in a sculpture, or whether that's in a cultural experience, as in sharing a meal together, or a festival, or whatever kind of art form that we might be talking about. Those were the questions that we had people answer. And we ensured that Italian Americans were placed at tables with people who were not Italian American, who did not share the same view as them. And so one of the most poignant questions that were asked was, what would your great-great-grandmother think about how you are experiencing your culture today? And people had to answer that question in front of each other. And so Columbus is a big hub for New Americans. So we had a ton of New Americans sitting at the table answering those questions alongside, so really first-generation Italian Americans, but you can imagine that there's a 60-year age difference. And so what was found was this commonality of, actually, our stories are really similar and we really want the same things. We also made sure that in those broad conversations that we were hearing from a variety of different people. And when we weren't, we then began to think about how we might begin to have affinity-based conversations. And those facilitators specifically were identified to look like the people who we were asking to come have conversation. So we had conversation in Black communities. We had conversation in the Latino community held at a Latino gallery. We had conversations with college students. We had conversations with Italian Americans at an Italian American Catholic church. And the priest was present. And we also had a number of other conversations, specifically with Indigenous people and out in nature, that really provided people an opportunity to feel safe in having conversations. And what we found, and every single one where the themes were the same, they just showed up differently.
Yeah, thank you for the question. There's many stages of the outreach that happened in our project. For the Sleepy Lagoon Memorial, we really wanted, again, the Tongva voice and conversation to be present. Those that were descendants or connected to the Sleepy Lagoon and the trials to be represented, as well as the community that lives there now in the city of Maywood and in Southeast LA, especially when we didn't have a specific site in mind. There was a collaborative effort visiting the different places where it could potentially be and hearing from folks would you actually go here? There was one that was considered as an option that was closer to the proximity of where the Sleepy Lagoon used to be, but it's heavy industrialized. It's divided. There's the city of Maywood and the rest of Southeast LA, and then there's the river and the freeway. So it's a really roundabout way to get there. And so we asked, be honest, where would you actually visit? Where do you actually want to see this? And for that project, there was interview processes that happened with Native Indigenous folks, Tongva, but also Indigenous leaders that are in the diaspora that live in Southeast LA and Los Angeles. There was also focus groups to help us pin specific locations down, specific narratives. And the artists from Apache City Projects, they led a lot of the educational components also in weaving art to start understanding what are people drawing and bringing to the conversation that can also be molded and used in the memorial. And so that's where the renderings came from. As Adriana mentioned in our presentation, Communities for a Better Environment was looking at the scoping for either a new project, a new park space in Maywood, or the redevelopment, giving Maywood Riverfront Park a facelift. And folks said, yeah, that one, let's renovate this park. And through we have a rich and vibrant culture of street vendors. And so CBE partnered with street vendors to do a lot of the surveys and pass out the surveys to folks that patron the park already, that know them and have that relationship. We also did a lot of just standing days at the park to do outreach and to share with folks about the project. And then the third phase would be once we got the Mellon Foundation that allowed the artists to also experiment with the programming that they would want to see once there is a fully new park project. And through that, weaving the conversation of these are the current visuals that we have. What do you think? And in those specific outreach days, there was, I shared earlier the story of there was a person doing his laps at the park, and you could tell he was kind of he wanted to talk, but he also wasn't sure. And he made assumptions, rightfully so, about what we were doing. But once we started the conversation, then he gave a lot of input. He started participating in the art projects that were happening. And with the reality of us reaching everybody all at once was hard, but I think frequency of being in the community, of sharing. The city also has been a great partner. And they asked one final survey at one point as well to the residents that live in the city of Maywood, just to make sure that the amenities were clear and that the park was going to get the things that folks were looking for. And so, yeah, that's been how we've been engaging and continuously like sharing about it. Mm-hmm.
Well, for the Conservancy, it's very different. You're trying to start a new space and bring constituent groups together to contemplate something that's totally new, where we have an established space that everyone kind of cares about, and we have to report to 5 different community boards. We talked about Community Board 10. There's 5 other boards that we have to report out to that ask specific things about their neighborhood related to the park. And so we have a long-term relationship with a lot of the communities. We might go there with some basic project. It's just, maybe it's a playground or some smaller scale thing. But also when some bigger thing comes up, we have this history of relationship to be able to at least start the dialogue, start to understand who the real players are. So maybe there's a hot item that comes up that brings everybody out, but we've already talked to the mothers that were interested in the playgrounds. We also talked to the joggers that are thinking about the running track or whatever. So we start to have a sense of what the broader audience is and then try to facilitate that in a broader way. And so as Lane was talking about the pool project, the Lasker project, and the conversion to the more historic profile, this issue comes up in the meeting, and we're listening. We could have sort of said, well, the city doesn't let you do this, the city doesn't let you do that. But actually, we step back and look at the framework of the park, what the park was historically meant for, and maybe lots of times we feel the public doesn't really, they use it, but they don't feel what that lung does for the bigger part of the city. And so we're always prepared to sort of look at that history, try to set it in context. And so actually us knowing the context of the history of the park allowed us to offer something to the community that we hope they might accept. And so for them, being informed about that history actually made it more meaningful. The fact that they could go around the park and maybe they had never noticed before that the names were ever on the entrances. But when we offered that as a proposal, they realized, oh my God, they've been here since, a longer period than my life, and what they're offering me is offering that to us, this longer journey in this story that we're putting into the walls. This is a sacred sort of space, a sacred sort of historic marker, and we're adding you and nobody else. Like we said, it hadn't happened since the 1860s. We had to get permission. It was the one and only time since that period that the name was being added. And just hearing that and feeling, oh, wow, we're in there with everybody else, the merchants and the other people who are honoring the city, I think meant a lot to people.
And I love that story, and I myself didn't know the history behind all the namings of the gates of the park. And I think that's really wonderful how you were able to weave in a more recent history within the framework of the park itself. And that brings me to the next question, which is related to history and time. And it's something that we have discussed amongst ourselves as we were preparing for this conversation. But the reality is that all of your projects are interpreting events that happened many years ago. In the case of the Sleepy Lagoon, you're actually commemorating many layers of history, similar with the Columbus Memorial. And in many cases, those histories get convoluted over time, right? And people have their different interpretations. And the reality is that you are finding a moment in time to speak about those histories, to unearth them, to reinterpret them. You're then building it, which is going to take some time. And eventually, it might be a different generation that actually gets to experience that space that was not part of this process. So my question to you is, how do you design a commemorative landscape that can remain relevant as generations, histories, and narratives change? And you specifically mentioned something on the presentation that you discover that permanence is not best, but you still are creating a physical space that needs to have a permanency. So how do you balance that? How do you create a physical space that can last the test of time, but can still be interpreted by many generations, perhaps, and engage different narratives as points of view change around the topics you're commemorating or around the histories of the city at large?
Starting with me this
Yes.
time again.
Oh, do you want to change?
We can.
We can do rotating chairs. How about you, Cindy? How about you?
Well, but we already have this sort of sacred space that has survived over time. And so having the opportunity, either through the Mellon Grant or whatever, for the Conservancy to be the party to start looking at all that together, as opposed to, say, a project that's generated by politics. So there's the Women's Monument. It was going to be the Year of the Woman. And no one came and said, well, it's the Year of the Woman. What is New York going to do to have something by that year that really speaks to that? Instead, someone else came up with the idea for a statue. The descendants of, I think, Katie Stanton and somebody else, they got the artists, they had a maquette that they were taking around. And now, why shouldn't it be in Central Park? And in fact, there was no statue to a living woman in Central Park. They were all characters from storybooks or whatever. And so all of a sudden it got picked. All of a sudden now we're up against the date. And so the art was already designed. Now they're trying to find a site. And then when they started to show the public the broader art, they said, well, who said these two women represent the women's movement, And they said, well, what about the African-American woman? What about this? And so all they did was sort of carp up added pieces to this sculpture to just meet a political moment. And if that date wasn't there or the other things, there would be a much more thoughtful process about what do we want to do in this great park in New York City to honor women's history across the board in a broader way. And it probably would have been a real competition and setting out to do that years before the date. Instead, it's like we have Hillary Clinton coming on June 15th. Where is it in the process? It was all these other things that had nothing to do with a project, a final product that really would be representative of the quality of other things that were done. And so I do feel we have a kind of advantage with the Mellon money. You can certainly feel that in the Mellon money. Any minority group, to do anything well, it takes time and conversation. And if you don't have that, and that's a money resource, if you don't have that, it's very hard to get something really exemplary if it's just driven by the political agenda. I think you can have the political agenda, but I think being able to step back and really present the broader story, and have people trust you, and all of us can realize that getting that trust, the sense that you really are listening. It's not, yes, I control this piece of property, but I really want to hear what you have to say. It takes time to build that.
Yeah. We haven't had this conversation with all the different collaborators of this project, but I think that's one of the goals with the stewardship conversation that we're going to be engaging in, is figuring out what does that look like, how institutionalized, how community-driven is that, and community-led is that. Those are all different elements of the stewardship that we're considering, and I think that it's going to address some of this question. The other thing that comes to mind is also around a concern that we had as East Yard in terms of development and what that comes with in terms of displacement. And so while we were having these conversations, we were also realizing the landscape in terms of tenant protections and tenants' rights. We have a dense renting community. For some context also, I grew up in the city of Maywood. My parents were tenants. They continue to be tenants. And so this is really critical to this. How can the folks that are informing this project also remain in that community? And thankfully, a little shout out to Caracol, our folks, Mateo and Jasmine, who do our tenant rights advocacy work as East Yard, have been in a really great relationship with the city of Maywood, and we've passed different tenant protections because we see the issue of permanence there when it comes to our own community members.
For us, when we thought about designing this space and recontextualizing this statue, I think we always came back to how do we design a place that will last for generations, which is why it's called this generational vision. And I think we continued to ask ourselves what makes us human and what is the thing that connects us all. And I think for our team, it was ensuring that everyone could be seen and could see themselves in the place that they were going and being. And again, it was also about reconnecting to nature. I think all of us who maybe don't live in a place that you get to be outside, to feel the sun on your body, to feel, water on your feet, that is something, whether you know it or not, that is fundamental to who we are. And creating a space that could create that opportunity for people was at the center of our mission and at the center of our planning process. And so that's why our piece was right on the river. It's why we had a different experience on the other side of the river that allowed you to look at the new facility as well as the timeline and the gardens. We had the nature play over there intentionally so. But again, it was thinking about what makes us all human and removes kind of whatever this hierarchical ethos around what monuments have always been, and thinking about it in a different way.
And that's one of the things I love about these three projects, that they really step away from the object or from the singular interpretation, and they're about experience. And the experience ultimately comes because they're set in a natural setting where maybe everybody has a different feeling about it, or a different impression or impact, but it is intended to make you feel something. But at the same time, one of the things that I think makes it challenging is that to be in nature within the city, within your cities, you are in public land. And public land comes also with a lot of strings attached, whether it is policy, whether it is government. In the case of Central Park, I'm very aware of all of the city's guidelines around not making monuments for living people, and all of these other issues, right, that I know also could limit the creativity around some of these projects. So my question to you is, you're all coming from a different perspective, from nonprofits, from conservancies. What role did the city, public agencies, or even policy take in your projects? And were those collaborative roles, or were those roles that actually challenged what you were trying to accomplish? And I'm going to start with you, Amanda, because you just finished.
Sure. This project created a lot of fear in our city and with our politicians, because the Italian American community is very organized, they're very vocal, and they're very wealthy, and they contribute to a lot of campaigns. And so it was really important that their voices were heard, not for a political reason, but just generally to the process. And so I would say that there was a lot of nerves and a lot of fear from the city's perspective in allowing these conversations that were very non-traditional for our city. I mean, to host a community conversation at an Adena Mound in a metro park, facilitated by a non-planner, facilitated by an indigenous storyteller, it's a big deal for our city. And the Mellon money made that possible because it allowed them to say, there's no public dollars associated with this project. This is something that is an experiment. And they have since said that this has kind of set the precedent for what new community engagement and these projects look like. But it was very tense to convince them to allow us to have conversations like this. The way that we presented the outcomes of our process was at a progressive dinner. We presented the different outcomes with different courses. And that also is very different to the city, right? Like, we had appetizers while we talked about public art plans, and right. And so these people who had participated in our 2-year-long process are sitting there having dinner together, having had dialogue with folks who they had serious disagreements with over the course of the 2-year process. So from a community engagement perspective and a permission perspective, the City of Columbus had a lot of fear around that. The City of Columbus, as I said in my presentation, also has no public art policy. That also means that they do not have a de-accession policy. And the majority of these communities who have pulled statues down also don't have solid de-accession policies. And they didn't follow a policy if they had it when they were pulled down. And so that's where we're all kind of caught up in these legal conversations. And so I think that allowed the city to say, hey, public art is important. People care about it outside of this monument portion of the discussion. But even more so, our policies and procedures are really important to get in place for the next time this is going to happen, because it will. Because public opinion and public memory and public view changes, and we're living through that right now.
And I'm curious, did this project spur new policies, or new policies being spoken about?
I am not in those conversations. I am not on the staff of City of Columbus. I am an independent consultant, and I, as a resident and a business owner within the City of Columbus, am continuing to advocate for that.
And Cindy, on your case, you spoke a lot about tenants' rights and ensuring that community remains. Has your project spurred anything beyond the park itself that speaks to those interests?
Yeah, so the city has been pretty supportive. Maywood is a very small city, a small municipality, a small budget. And so to create this project, I think, has been they've been really, I think, grateful, and us too, to be able to have that collaboration take place. Adriana, as a project manager, engages a lot with them and is reporting back on the community feedback, the design, and also hearing about like the limitations in terms of maintenance and operation in particular. So there have been some hard decisions that we've had to make for the full project, but also for the city's livelihood and for them to be able to realistically support and maintain this project in the future. And so a lot of support for that. With the tenant protections, it's also been a supportive relationship. Mateo and Jasmine from our team right now actually have been supporting the council also in terms of ensuring and securing the protections that have been created and the implementation of them. And so it's been a good, healthy process, and from our perspective, yeah.
Well, I always think trying to deal with the city is like it's biblical in terms of relationship, and I don't think they think your project's going to go forward. So they're only very pleasant in the beginning. Then you go back with stage 2, and then they tell you there's 8 other things you have to do, plus bring the witch's broom back, all the other And so for an outsider, like all these projects are started by outside communities that now want a piece of the history and a part of the communities of which most of us have had no experience, have had no background in the maneuvering of all of it. So lots of times there are people who are coming to the forum with the anger that we talked about, unrealistic sense of time frame and all that. And so it's a hard job to sort of balance all those things. And I see why the city doesn't want it, because in the city, if you moved up in the process, you're always worrying about the next commissioner. You're not thinking about the breadth of opportunity. Like the great thing about the Conservancy is I came to it as a resident from Harlem, going to projects that when I wasn't even working for them, and the sense of engagement over time and having a agency that can broker. We sort of wedge. Sometimes we have to take on things maybe we wouldn't like in the park or whatever, but we also have the opportunity when we see a tsunami coming to be able to have a conversation with a variety of players and understanding the variety of players you have to talk to. But for underserved communities, it's really, really hard. It's a real gift that Mellon has been looked at the long haul, the ability to fund you and to have these conversations to get to a place where the broader audience can see, even the power players can start to see, oh, this is worthwhile doing. These are voices we never even heard from before, or whatever that is. And I think we're setting the communities up for maybe 4 years from now or so, when maybe the climate's different, to be really prepared to put great projects forward when the federal level is going to be more supportive and all of that. And I really hope that we spend this time to really, I feel I have an advantage to be able, and we had this conversation earlier, that we're in a unique position to serve our communities. And how can we bring this expertise and information, and organizing, so when the window does open up, there's a broad breadth, in terms of what people can do.
And I think that's the great thing about all of your stories, is that they started with the idea of questioning how you commemorate something. But in the end, they ended up opening new opportunities for community dialogue, and even new opportunities for the dialogue with the government, with the city, with policies that extended beyond the project. And I think that's something that's really important for all of us to keep in mind, that there's policies in place to keep the cities running, but there's also opportunities and moments that allow us to rethink those or expand on those. And that it's important to reflect on that. That is never a static. In the same way as history is not static, interpretations of history are not static, the way our city evolves also should not be. So with that, I think we have some opportunity for questions from the audience.
Thank you. Yes, we have about 10 minutes left, and we'd love to open it up for questions from the audience. Salman, Salman has a microphone. I have a microphone. Salman, if you would take that side, I'll go this side. We've got a hand over there. We could do Jerry Springer here. No.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, my question's for the Columbus team. Well, thanks for sharing the project. Love the sort of landscape-oriented solution, but I feel like there's really an elephant in the room with this specific, very fascinating example, which is that, you're dealing with the Columbus statue, but also the name of your city is Columbus. So just wondering, how was that a sticking point in your process, or did it help? Did it like sort of dismiss the process in some people's mind, or, like how did you deal with the scale of what was, beyond your scope of work there that, you could only deal with this one sort of symbol?
I'll answer it in a funny way first and then a serious way second. There has been a call for many, many, many years to rename Columbus. Guy Fieri is from Columbus, so people are like, let's just name it Flavortown. But unfortunately or fortunately, that to change the name of a city, especially a capital city, would be an act of the state legislature. If you know anything about Ohio, that's never going to happen. So people had that question all the time. We had prepared answers to questions like that where we just answered them the exact same way every single time because it's totally outside of our scope of work and also not possible. We also, something that's kind of interesting and funny is that the city of Columbus hosted a Mariflora to celebrate Christopher Columbus's 500th anniversary and his journeys. And so all over our city are all these different relics of Christopher Columbus. Like our city seal is literally the Santa Maria. On the major Broad Street Bridge, which is our downtown bridge, there are 54 different medallions and they all represent different colonial symbols, including the Santa Maria and a number of other things. So there was also conversations about changing the city seal and changing the city flag, also outside of our scope, but I think the city received input from the public for the first time about those things in a very formal way and heard from the community that that was also something that they wanted to see addressed, which we hope will be addressed in the future.
Is there anyone else with a question?
A little bit different from the engagement part, but looking at the Los Angeles area project, looked very green. But Los Angeles is not a city known for a lot of moisture, although you're next to a river that may or may not run depending on the month of the year. So what consideration went to how the project decided to be landscaped?
I'm like, maybe I'm like, can I phone a friend?
Thank you. Oh, okay.
She got a mic. She got a mic.
Who asked this? Yeah, I think that's a fair question. Partly it's the color palette that we chose, but if it were truly representative of the true planting palette that we're proposing, it would be California native plants that are able to sustain themselves during like summer dry periods. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Hi. So I'm gonna admit that I am very closely tied to Southeast LA, but across all three projects, I heard a lot about like racial solidarity and representation. And as someone who grew up in a state with a lot of representation and not enough justice, I am curious how in these projects or future projects you might be thinking already about incorporating class solidarity and consciousness and and how that plays into, especially like you mentioned in Columbus, where public spaces are a place for gathering and protest and activism and democracy to take place.
Yes. Kim? I'll stand over in the corner because I have on heels. Okay, so it mattered the way we started the conversation because, as Amanda stated, we wanted to immediately not allow people to kind of take over in what happens, because then what was about to happen was people were going to bully people into conversations to say, my story is the most important one, right? So we took that element away, but what we were also trying to do, and I'm grateful that Amanda let me do this, is I was like, we don't necessarily believe that the city will do everything that we said. So we need to make sure that the people get food, some kind of social justice food, no matter what, right? And so we're going to just slide in here some social justice elements, and we're going to show that there is power in the collective of the people, no matter what happens with the statue. So we made sure that we were teaching them things the whole way. When we did the Art of Hosting conversations and we did the World Cafe, we never had a public conversation where we didn't ground them first. So we physiologically grounded their nervous systems. And then we did conversations. We taught them vocabulary words. We taught them about stop saying that the space is safe, right? Because we've got a whole bunch of different kinds of identities in the room. And so we need to be clear about that. We were very clear about how we defined those 8 values and saying, for a multitude of reasons, people are not having the same experiences, right? And so we need to speak truth to power, and we made sure we did that. And so we used those elements in place the whole time, which made a lot of people very angry. And in fact, in one of our first conversations, the first thing we heard was that there was a group of Italians who came to protest. Yeah. The first conversation, right? And so, but full circle, and the reason why I'm so grateful for that is when we did our progressive dinner at the end, one of the last things that happened, and I think you remember this too, one of the most vocal, very wealthy, older Italian men had a very challenging conversation with a little black girl, right? And they were over dessert, over cheesecake cups, but they were having a conversation, and he didn't realize that she was saying, here's why this statue is disruptive to who I believe I am. And for this reason. And you can't argue with a 6th grader who's saying, this doesn't look like me. This is unjust. And it made him listen. But they had 2 years of practice doing that. And so I'm grateful that we were able to say, no matter what happens, we need to show people that there is a way to be able to have conversations and disagree and say, I don't necessarily agree with you, but I understand you better. And now I have a practice way of knowing how to listen to you.
Well, I always compare to the surveys that go on now. They say, are you unhappy with the direction America is going? And they say 90% of the American population disagrees with the direction America is going, but 50 of them want to go left and 50 of them want to go right. And so you could take a number and say there's a consensus around something, but for different people it means different things, and always to think about that.
I think for the Sleepy Lagoon, the process was a lot around visibility. Julia Bogoni gave so much of her life to gain and offer visibility to her grandchildren in terms of knowing and folks acknowledging the Tongva community. And that has been one of the most sacred pieces of this work, as well as the visibility of the Sleepy Lagoon as a body of water and reconnecting folks to body of waters and just our relationship with the elements. That has also been really, really critical through this project as well. And the memory of both the recreational parts of water and the sour history that this brings, but also the resistance piece of it. One of the outreach moments that I didn't get to name, or we didn't name earlier, was this artist, Arturo Gonzalez. He came to the first scoping sessions that we had in 2019 and shared about his family's lineage to the Pachuco culture and that time period. And then later on, he's a really talented artist also. And he had known about the project, and so he reached out asking if he could apply for the Coastal Conservancy's grant for different art projects for a mural at Maywood Riverfront Park. And this is when we were also still figuring out the collaborative piece amongst all the different organizations, figuring out what are the next design questions that we need to bring to community members. And we said, yeah, let's do it. And that started a mural project, which is now in the handball courts. It wraps the handball courts that one of the local high schools, he was able to do outreach at the local high schools to also teach students on what it looks like to be a mural artist. We did scoping sessions also to inform the art piece as well. There was no pre-planned design for the mural. But it's also I'm saying all this because it's also been an opportunity to give access to the arts in communities that are oftentimes denied, where that's a big cut in the budget for school districts usually. And those are just other elements. And I think our communities are constantly fighting. And this is one of those projects that allows us to dream. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As I think about this statue in front of the Museum of Natural History and how that was well, we have to take this down. But that museum had they had three figures, Native American and African American. In front of the Museum of Natural History, they were on the ground. And Theodore Roosevelt was on the horse. And so the argument was, oh, he's on the horse and he's taller, they're submissive to him. But in front of the Museum of Natural History, here were two cultures that valued the land, and they're shown connected to the land. And that conversation never happened in the debate of whether it stayed or go. Like, here are cultures that valued this, and another culture took it away. And I feel we need to have the kind of conversations and not just the knee-jerk reaction of sort of, this has got to go tomorrow. And then you'll see them running and bring it back 10 years later because it's specific to an argument and not the bigger conversation.
Thank you very much. I wanted just to extend a sincere thanks to all of our participants this evening, and to thank all of you for coming and joining us in this conversation. Those of us working on the Seneca Village Commemorative Project, we've spent a lot of time recently working towards building a shared foundation and sharing the history of Seneca Village. And one of our motivations for bringing this group together is to hear different ways of engaging with community. And it's been really inspiring to hear the different ways that you have come up with connecting with an urban community, right, which we all know is large. And represents many different folks. So thank you for sharing your experience with us all. I am energized to move forward with the Seneca Village project. For all of you, thank you for your time and joining us tonight. This recording of this evening will be available on our website. Our last conversation where we talked a little bit more to your question, Isabel, about public policy and the specific role, the specific steps one must take in New York City to put a monument in a public space. That is also available online for recording. So please join us, tune in. We will be having more programs coming down the road. So thank you all. Have a good night. And if I could get you to come for a photograph, it would be awesome.
Oh, yeah, I'd love to.
I know, right? I had like a familiar.
Okay. Do we call them up too?
Yeah, but they cut my mic.